Welcome to the Jeremiah Show. The award-winning author, Grammy-nominated producer, and multimedia storyteller, the Reverend Shawn Amos. He's my special guest today. He brings with him a gift. His new album. It's called Soul Brother Number One, and it is fantastic. So I like to sit with an album cover. You know this if you listen to the show. You know that I love album covers. Is there such a thing as a connoisseur of album covers? I think if there is, it's me. I let the album cover talk to me. What is it trying to tell me? I know that before the album found its way to me, however that happens in that mysterious way, the artist had spent hours, maybe days, maybe even weeks looking at photographs, choosing color schemes, and designing that cover, all for this very moment, the moment when their listener, their fans hold it in their hands. The moment right now that I am in as I hold it in my hands. I hold Reverend Shawn Amos' album, and it's called Soul Brother Number One, as I mentioned. And I'm just sitting with this album cover. The music is being piped into my earphones. I'm really enjoying it. And I'm letting my first impressions of Reverend Shawn Amos wash over me without any conscious thought. So let me describe what I'm holding in my hands. Let me describe the album cover to you. The backdrop of the photo is smoky, ashy, fiery. Reverend Shawn Amos has stepped from the ember's mouth towards me. No shirt. The Reverend's bright red pants match the threads in his embroidered cap. The cap's pulled down, it's cockeyed over his sunglasses. And man, that's a cool cap. I spent a lot of time looking at that cap. Chains and beads hanging from around his neck, swinging forward. Yellow, amber, and grays, and they're frozen by the camera's lens, and his hands are behind his back. He's leaning in. His body's pointing forward. And in the photograph, his body language reads to me open, ready for a connection. He's alive. Now my focus is on that huge smile, the laugh that you cannot hear, but you can see. You can feel it through the photo. The exhilaration, the pain, and vulnerability of being an African American artist in a world on fire, says Reverend Shawn Amos. I am throwing myself out there. I've never sung like this before. I've never written this direct before, but I'm still firing on all cylinders. So here I am, and all of my joy, my rage, and hubris. Welcome, Reverend Shawn Amos.
Wow, thank you. I
Welcome.
have never heard an analysis of an album cover of mine before. That was so fun to hear.
Yeah, I
Thank you for
stared at it for a long time, but now I want you to. You don't have it probably in front of you, but pretend you do. And would you look at the cover with me and
well,
what do you see? What do you see? Who is that man in that photo?
it was funny, man. You talked about how artists will, sort of look at their proposed art or sort of think for days, weeks, months, whatever. It was months for me. I mean, that photo was months in the making, literally. And in some respects, and it hasn't worked out this way for me before, the cover almost came before the songs. I had this image of who I wanted to hear and see singing these songs that I wanted to write, but hadn't written them yet. And I needed to understand the character before I could write the script. And so I spent literally weeks in my place, staring. I could show you if we had if this is a TV or video program, I would show you all of the selfies I took and all of the sort of propped up, camera photos, and just looking at myself, these self-portraits. It was really, if I
Right,
was a painter,
right.
I would have been it would have been a series of sketches and self, like Joni Mitchell does all these self-portraits. Yeah, that's a big body of her work is self-portraits. And I never fully understood the self-portrait, before. I thought it was just this, exercise in vanity. Um, but as a way, it became like an extension of the songwriting. It's like, so much of my songwriting is an attempt to understand myself and an attempt to reconcile parts of my past and to figure out how I want to, how I can move forward in the world in the way I in my best self. But it's been limited to music. And so, but for some reason I couldn't start the music. So I had this image, the self-portrait put together. And so this all these photos of me like looking into the camera and and posing in wide angle lenses, and I'd shave my head, and I mean I was just driving my girlfriend crazy because it was just, man, and then the shirtless thing came to mind, and well, what is that about, and just examining myself for months until I finally figured out who Soul Brother number one was. And then at that point there's an amazing photographer who took that photo. His name's Fred Siegel, and works out of Los Angeles, and he's
Is it
phenomenal.
the Fred Siegel?
It's not the Fred Siegel of
No.
the clothing.
Okay.
He's passed away.
Fashion
So
guy? No.
yeah, not him. Different Fred Siegel. But he has shot me before for press photos and never an album cover. And so he and I. So once I had these sort of these photos that I felt were indicative of what I wanted, I sent him those, and then we had this back and forth for another bunch of weeks, just sort of figuring out what this was. And there's a lot of conversation around other Black 70s icons, many of whom posed or performed shirtless. So, Isaac Hayes, the famous one of him with all the gold sort of chains on his body. Al Green, Bobby Womack, Sly Stone obviously was a big influence on this album. So it was a lot of this. And so by the time I showed up for the shoot, uh, it went by pretty quickly, because the homework had been done. And I think I think by the time we did the shoot, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, we had tracked the album already, but it wasn't fully mixed. So we had some of the songs playing during the photo shoot, but it wasn't the full mix. And actually, one song I had not recorded yet. So I was pretty well in the space, but it took, yeah, it was months. It was months. I mean, I think the cover may have taken longer than the
Mm.
songs
Well,
themselves.
I can see that because if you listen to the album, and I was looking at the cover as I wrote what I wrote and
Yeah,
listening to the album at the same time, and I can see that had to come first for you, that you experimented, because you have a lot of thoughts, a lot of really great thoughts, and an outlook on the world, your world and our world, in this album, uh, which I'm sure at some points could cause you to become angry. At some points, love, this great feeling of love for the things and the people around you, um, politics, all these different emotions that probably they're almost reflected in that cover. And you also want to be approachable, right? You've got eventually what shines through is that you're a great communicator and a great artist, that it shines through in the photo album or the cover as well. So that
thank you,
actually
man.
makes sense. And Revelation, it's the first song I'm going to play out as we go to break, but was that one of the first that came to mind after all of these photo shoots and these
It's
kind of looking at
funny,
yourself?
there were there are actually three songwriting sessions for this album. And then the first session was before I knew I was making this album. During COVID, my usual band, I'll call it the Brotherhood. And I've made two albums with the Brotherhood, and they've been my touring band for the last number of years. During COVID, we all were writing together in this virtual way. So our guitarist, Dr. Roberts, would come up with a guitar riff or a guitar melody. He would punt it over to our bassist, CT, Thompson, who lives in Paris. And then CT would punt it over to Brady Blade, our drummer, who lives in Sweden and Stockholm. And then this finished demo, really crude, but a song would then get punted back to me in Texas, and I would get to sit around with it and think of lyrics, which is really like this is just a gift. So I was sort of waiting in my inbox, these MP3s would pop up and I'd get these little gifts, you know, well, all I had to do was just think lyrically, which was a kind of a first for me. And it was really luxurious. And I had just written my book. So I was very much in this lyrical, you know, writerly state of mind. And so we wrote a bunch of songs like that. And Revelation was one of those songs. And so then that was session number one. And then months and months later, while I'm doing the selfies and trying to, you know, the Soul Brother number one thing is kicking around in my head, I wrote Soul Brother number one. And that became sort of the beginnings of another songwriting song that I did by myself. And then the third session was when I had these bits of songs, and we talk about them later, that I knew I couldn't get across the finish line. And I also felt they were funk oriented and soul oriented and keyboard, you know, they need to be sort of written on a keyboard. They need those keyboard voicings. And so I needed another partner there. And so my producer, James Sayas, introduced me to a songwriter and keyboardist named Dapo Toramira, who's a Nigerian artist who does work with John Legend and Justin Bieber, and very different musical world than me. And we got together and wrote together. So those are the three things. And I pulled a couple songs out of that first Brotherhood writing session, of which Revelation was one of them. And it wasn't going to be the lead track. Actually, you know, Soul Brother number one was going to be the lead track. It seemed like to be the obvious lead track. Like, here I am, I'm Soul Brother number one. But as I was sequencing, and I love sequencing, and I come from such an album background, that's really important. I still hear things in terms of side one and side two. And Revelation just seemed like more of the opening, you know, the master shot, you know, and sort of this sort of like, you know, why we gathered here today, you know, and that felt more like I guess a call to arms in a way. And so that one became the opening track, but it's really in your face, you know, it's aggressive. It's sort of, and that photo is interesting because, you know, that photo could be read as open-hearted and smiling, but also could be read as like screaming, you know, it's sort of both. And I like that about it. And I agree with you that ultimately I'm
Hard to
about
capture all
joy.
those different emotions in a
Yeah.
photo like that, but you did.
And ultimately I'm about joy, you know, and I'm about love. And I
Yep.
think that's what's going to get us through, you know, and empathy. But you know, you can't help but you got to be honest about the things that make you rageful.
Mm-hmm.
In order
Mm-hmm. And we're
to not let it, in order to not let it eat you up inside, you got to metastasize. You got to sort of let that stuff move through you.
well, it's that
And so
honesty, right, that you're sharing and
yeah,
expressing in music that we need as a listener. You need somebody to be honest to you, and you need to be able to connect
yeah,
with that. You know, you need to
it's
be able to
all of
connect
it.
with
Totally,
those
totally. And I don't do
emotions.
stuff normally that hard. You know, my music, if you look at listen to my catalog, I mean, none of it's hard really, you know, and that's the hardest track probably I've ever recorded. I mean, it's muscular, it's got this odd time signature, it's heavy, it's a heavy track. And so I just felt like I wanted to, and people who hear that might think, oh man, this is like a hard rock album or what, you know, and there's a lot of sort of curveballs on the album musically, but it felt like that was the right thing to just like, hey, we're in a world on fire right now,
Mm-hmm.
and let me just sing through that fire for a moment. That's Revelation.
Think about it. There aren't many places you can go, we can go right now, where you can be honest with your music is personal between you and the artist, such as yourself. If I'm listening to your music and it's a personal thing between you and I'm connecting, I
Mhm.
can be honest with my thoughts. I can be honest with the things that are bothering me in the world right now in a way that we can't do that right now.
With
Um,
one another, it's hard to do
with
with one
one
another.
another,
Yeah,
but you
yeah, yeah.
can, you get that personal time with the album and with the songs, and you can kind of reflect on what, you know, you're going through,
Yeah,
what the world's
that's
going
a great
through.
point, man. Yeah, and it's all, I mean, and the album really isn't in, but because this was my process. It was like, how can I get, you know, I was uncomfortable with a lot of these emotions, and I was uncomfortable burying myself this way. I mean, you know, the whole shirtless thing and all. I mean, there's the plainness of and the sort of the frankness of the language. I'm a writer who is largely written in metaphor and illusion and sort of the language of poetry, you know, where things intentionally can have multiple meanings. And a lot of this album is just like, you know, it's very plain spoken. And that was a hard place for me to come from, to sort of have nothing to hide behind, you know, literally and figuratively. But I wanted to do that. It was part of my own journey, my own, healing in my own way forward, but I also hoped it would be, an invitation to others to, you know, to you can have the bluster, but be honest. It's like we can, we can all be our own individual sort of we're in this world of like self-aggrandizing ourselves and everyone's the best at everything and look at me, look at me, look at me. But where's the personal responsibility that comes with that, and how can we improve upon our empathy and our curiosity about others while also being, unapologetically proud about who we are, unapologetically Black, unapologetically white, unapologetically Israeli, unapologetically Palestinian, whatever it is, be unapologetically true to yourself, LGBTQ, and at the same time have empathy and curiosity about others' unapologeticness. And so that was my own journey in this, and it's been part of my journey relocating from California to Texas, and just, learning how to live amongst, others and,
Mhm.
and have love, and at the same time not having to dim my own light, to make others feel
Yeah.
comfortable.
Yeah. It must be if you stopped and thought about you, quote unquote, your responsibility as an artist, to be honest with your listeners, because that's when the music connects the most, right? And when the poetry and the lyrics and the thoughts that we all have in different ways. When you're that must be almost a heavy burden if you think about it, that you like you talked about, you putting yourself out there shirtless, is a perfect metaphor. You're naked to the world, right? You're
Yeah,
exposing your deepest thoughts and what's going on in your mind, and how you are communicating and processing that, and in turn we are as well. And I thought today, when I was you know listening to your music, Revelation, looking at the album cover, and I thought, you and I, this is kind of cool. I mean, we got to take a break here, but this is kind of cool if you think about it, Reverend, that we never met before. And I'm listening to your music, and to be honest, I'd never heard it before. I've heard of you, but I've never heard that I can remember the music. So I'm
oh wow, this is your first introduction,
this is my
cool.
yeah my first introduction, and it's so like it's like this fantastic, very cool thing. We're kind of parallel lives. We're living in the same world at the same time in our lives. But at this moment, time and music brought us together, to kind of share and have some conversation. And
I love it.
and
Well, that's
it's very, very cool, right? If you think about how it all works. Well,
yeah, it's I did real quick. I know we have a break. You mentioned this sort of responsibility piece. It's less about that than it was like, it's like I worked with I had the pleasure of working with Quincy Jones for a while, and he always told me, you go where the fear is, you go where the fear is, and a lot of these songs and a lot of the things I was doing were scaring, the shit out of me, and and
go where the
I
fear is. That's a great.
and that just seemed like, the more it scared me and the more it made me uncomfortable, the more I knew I had to do it. Because I hadn't made a record like that in a while. Yeah, I got into a relatively comfortable space and I had a lane for myself, and I could sort of keep building upon that lane and, don't rock the boat. And there's always that party as an artist, right? I mean, you're an artist, but you're also, it's your livelihood, right? It's your business, and you don't you want to grow your audience,
Mhm.
and people are fickle, right? And people like what you do. Like, I get why AC/DC makes the same record over and over again. I mean, one, it's what they do, and they love it and they dig it, right? But it's like that's the formula, it works, and
Yeah.
screw it, And if you find something that works and resonates with people, it's hard to give that up sometimes. But I just I got to go where the fear is and where the curiosity is, and I hope that people who have liked me before will respect that and follow along. And I hope it's one of the reasons why they like me. And I hope at the same time it may attract people like yourself who haven't heard of me before, And so the tent will get bigger in the end of the day. But it was scary. I mean, it was the whole album and the release of it has been one of the scarier creative things I've done in a while.
Yeah. I know, to correct, I have heard of you, and I'm sure I've heard music, but I just hadn't heard anything recently, and really hadn't sat down with it, your album, and really
Well, I'm glad
soaked
you
it
did.
in. So, and I liked it. It's a great
Yeah.
experience, and I'm so happy to share it with everybody today. But I think
Thank
that's
you,
so
brother.
cool. Uh, was there any? I do have to take that break that I promised, but is there any? Those darn breaks. But the great thing about the breaks is we get to listen to your music
There
some
you
more.
go.
So, um, did you want to start a conversation with the album? Was there any underlying purpose at all, or was it just making great music, making great art, and going towards
Yeah.
that fear
Well, I mean,
yourself?
every album is a conversation.
Mm,
Every work of art you create is a conversation. And so I, yeah, I'm just, it's funny. It's my eighth studio album. I've done a couple live albums. I've done a number of singles, and I did a compilation album a couple of years back. 'Cause I published my first book, and so I put a compilation album out to sort of accompany the books. I figured people who were discovering me as an author may have no idea about my music life, and so if they wanted to find out about me, what would be a sort of
hmm
good entry point for them? And also, the book was semi-autobiographical, and so I wanted to have something that in some respects was like a companion piece to the book, if only sort of, esoterically, that told the story of my family, because I've written a lot of songs about my family in different ways. So I went back and listened to so I was putting that compilation together. I went back and for the first time in a long, long time, you got to listen to my catalog. And uh, there's a real story there.
Yeah.
I'm basically just telling the story of, my life in a lot of ways. And the thing that I think I'm really doing at this point is, you know, leaving clues behind for my kids, so they have a record of who I was and what was important to me, and
Mm.
what I thought. And hopefully there's some things in there that may help guide their own decision making, and sort of inform their own moral compass in some way. So that's a piece of it. And the other piece of it is I, I, I you know, I want to put out something that in some small way can just counter the negativity and the banality, of the world we live in. And so if in some small way I'm just putting out something energetically that that counters that, then that's helpful. And then the last thing is just, and maybe it's the most important, is just how I want to be of use, and I feel like this is, the way in which I'm most useful. And it may not reach the most amount of people. I may reach more people doing something else, but not necessarily be as useful. And so I want to be useful to myself and useful to others. And this is what I do.
Thank you for doing what you do. I am really loving it. And it's the award winning author, Grammy nominated producer, and multimedia storyteller, Reverend Shawn Amos, who's my special guest today. His new album is Soul Brother Number One by Reverend Shawn Amos. Go to shawnamos.com, SHAWNAMOS.com. You can follow all of his tour, his merchandise, some great merchandise there. Also find all his socials on shawnamos.com. We'll be right back. I'm going to take it a break right now with the first track that we're going to play off the album, Revelation. We'll be right back.